the Democrats fucked up so bad on so many major things in a row while also having no talent to be able to sell it. Nobody is buying, as much as they're all disgusted with Donald Trump. None of them are buying that the Democrats are the answer.
So recently, Dave Smith revealed why he believes that the two-party system in the United States is ultimately doomed. Despite what we've seen from the Trump administration and in the Biden administration, he gets into the shifting dynamics in American politics and whether he believes that the Democrats will be the beneficiaries of recent fallout over the Trump administration and how they've handled some things, including the Epstein story. So let's get his take on that. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
In the American voters' minds, Democrats, simply put, can't hack it. More voters trust Republicans on foreign policy, very much like they did back during the 2024 campaign.
All right. So I guess the reason why I find this to be so fascinating, and I could get into this, and you might be seeing where I'm going with this, Rob, but there's something like this almost seems to indicate to me that the two-party system itself might actually be in some real trouble. And when I say that, that essentially means the way this regime operates, which is through a two-party system. As somebody who has spent some time, I have dabbled in a third-party politics, and you cannot overstate how much the rules are rigged against third parties. And this is part of the reason why there's never a third party who wins. The rules are just so rigged against third parties on behalf of the two parties, down to the fact that for many years, and this almost like seems like something that's like a little thing that's lost in time, although obviously the debate was a big deal this last year. It was the moment Joe Biden had to drop out of the race, or the moment that led to Joe Biden having to drop out of the race, being forced out of the race. But for many years, access to the debates was the whole game. Before podcasts and the internet were huge, it was like, dude, this is going to be the one thing where the entire country gets to see who's running for president and what are they arguing about. And the debates, the debates themselves are just run by the two parties. Third parties are not allowed in.
Yeah, it's not only the debates too, but ballot access. Each state erects a lot of different boundaries for third parties to get involved, get their candidates recognized, to be even on the state ballot, to be considered for voting. Certain states it was more rigid on this than others, of course, but he's right about the debates too. But now we have the rise of the independent media where the debates don't seem to matter as much. And don't get me wrong, I think the first Trump and Biden debate did matter quite a bit in, exposing the follies that were people that still said that Biden was sharp as a tack. But more so than that, the podcast appearances that Trump made really kind of sold his presidency in a way that I don't think he would have gained recognition for otherwise. And by 2028, this game is going to be completely changed. I think you're going to see debates on podcasts rather than on cable news, or at least the most viewed ones will be on podcasts. And that's how politics is shifting. We have this new media.
They set the rules, and then if you hit the rule, they just change the rule. They did it to Gary Johnson. Like, you have to have at least two major polls where you're polling at least 10%. And then he's like, I have two polls where I'm polling at 10%. And then they go, oh, we just made it 4 polls, or we just made it 15% or whatever. They just won't let you in.
Yeah, and they shut candidates down that are popular on both sides. There's been civil wars in the Democratic Party over Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton. Rules changing to, allow the ascension of Clinton above Bernie, despite the fact that he had so much more popularity in many circles. Same thing happened in the Republican Party when it came to Ron Paul versus Mitt Romney. A lot of rules were changed to make sure that Romney would have enough delegates to support him, essentially nullifying Ron Paul's victories in Iowa, etc. This is what they do. This is the game. This is the bipartisan nature of the game, where you're actually filtered through the regime and what the regime wants, the political machine, to produce the two candidates that even Americans can choose from. This is exactly the rigged nature of American politics.
And so anyway, you have this two-party system, and the way this works, what is been called the duopoly, the way this works is that you keep it so that essentially these two parties are the ones that you have a chance. Like, look, we live in a democracy, but you don't actually get to decide anything, but you do get to vote.
Yeah, we have a democracy, but no one could choose the Democratic nominee in the last election because, hey, we're the party of democracy, except when it comes to our party, which is an oligarchy that just elevates Kamala Harris above anyone or any open primary or any open convention for her. That's exactly true.
For who decides things. And you can vote for Party A or Party B. Party A and Party B both agree on the 15 things that are most important to us, but they really fight about these other things. So, like, the Republicans and Democrats might really feel different about abortion. But when it comes to like war or monetary policy or fiscal policy or the militarization of the police, the prison industrial complex, like any of these, just a number of issues that just don't really come up that much, they completely agree. And so what happens is you have the illusion of having an option, but you just don't really have an option about these 10 most important things.
Yeah, I think that's undeniably true, especially when it comes to the financial apparatus, the central banks, the wars, the surveillance state. It's not like any party is proposing to roll back any of that stuff. I mean, there's been good rhetoric on the part of some candidates about that, even Trump. But as we've seen from Trump in office, he's not exactly someone that's a non-interventionist that's not going to start new wars like he did in Iran. He's not someone that's going to shut down the war in Ukraine, which he hasn't. He's rearmed Ukraine. So despite the rhetoric, what Dave is saying is actually true regardless of what the campaign themes are and the rhetoric and the slogans and America first. Well, it's been Israel first, and it was Israel first under Biden too. That's how this thing works. Even the rhetoric about abolishing the IRS, even when the president and the Republicans have the presidency, Congress behind them, they still don't even try to eliminate the IRS. They can't even eliminate the Department of Education after talking about that for essentially 40 years. They've, done some things to shift responsibilities from the Department of Education to other, sectors of the deep state. When it comes to student loans, I think those have gone under HHS or something like that. They've moved a lot of resources, but they won't shut these agencies down.
Let's say probably more than 10. But so and what always happens throughout my entire life is that this system has worked remarkably well to keep the American people docile and accepting of the regime that rules over them. I mean, like there's been many times throughout history where, a president ends his presidency in disaster, in disgrace, and the American people go, all right, then we're going to vote for the other party, And this happened several times in my lifetime. This is what always happens, right? Like if Jimmy Carter is like a failed president, well then by God, we will elect Ronald Reagan,
Yeah, this is so true. And it was Noam Chomsky that said that the way this regime works and its propaganda works is to confine the box, the acceptable range of opinions within a very narrow parameters, but allow very lively debate within those parameters. So you get all the theatrics, but really, both parties don't represent, a radical departure from the other. That's exactly how this regime has worked. It's why Michael Malice says, conservatism is progressivism driving the speed limit. And that's exactly true too.
And Ronald Reagan wasn't viewed as a failed president. And so, we kept George H.W. Bush in there, but he didn't do too good. So then we elect Bill Clinton. And, George W. Bush comes in. We hate his guts by the end of it. So we'll elect Barack Obama. And Barack Obama fails. Well, we'll give you Donald Trump. And the way this works is that what always happens is one party fucks up. And so then people start supporting the other party because that's the only weapon you have against the party that's fucking up. And this is really the first time that I can think of in my life. I mean, this is where if you're starting the presidency where Donald Trump has his highest approval ratings and the Democrats as a party have their lowest approval ratings. And then Donald Trump just starts fucking everything up and his approval ratings are coming down. Well, then what's supposed to happen here is that the Democrats' approval rating comes up because people start supporting the Democrats who are out there going, hey, this guy's fucking up. That's how the American political system has always worked. And I think now this is like the first time I've ever seen this where Donald Trump is fucking up. Everybody agrees his approval's coming down. Not everybody, but his approval's coming down. He's embroiled in these scandals. None of the stuff, as they're saying, none of the stuff he ran on is coming true. He couldn't end the war in Ukraine. He couldn't end the war in Gaza. He's the first president who bombed Iran. He's bombing the Houthis. The trade shit isn't really working at all. He's blowing up the debt. He's just, the mass deportations aren't happening, and the ones that are crazy, politicized and not going over well. And yet the Democrats are still sitting on like a 25% approval rating with no increase in sight. And
yeah, no, Dave's right. This is an interesting, dynamic. Usually the opposition party is the beneficiary of low approval ratings by a sitting president, but we're not really seeing that pan out. But ultimately, I'm sorry, Dave, I do think that in the end, when there is the next election, those margins will rise to meet the opposition, and you will have people ultimately voting for one of these two parties again. It's what always happens. I'm willing to entertain that doesn't happen, but I think the only way that doesn't happen is an extremely popular candidate runs for a third party, and a lot of people get behind him. We saw that from Theodore Roosevelt when he ran as a bull moose candidate. And he was extremely popular. RFK had quite a bit of popularity running as a third-party candidate before he eventually threw his support behind Trump as well. It's going to take some very popular candidate to disrupt that. And even what we're seeing now, it's like 6 months into Trump's term. So yeah, the Democrats don't have high approval ratings, but as it gets closer to the election, you will see people ultimately cast their votes for one of these two parties because they're shaken and swayed by the theatrics that occur in these elections and make it seem like there's a grand clash of ideologies between candidates like they sold when it came to Trump versus Harris. But, regardless of the names, the deep state remains the same. And that's what we've always seen.
Every time you put them up in a head-to-head poll like this, it's still the exact same thing. I just think that is a very I don't want to overplay it because we'll see where all of this goes, but don't you think that's a pretty interesting development? I've never seen that happen before. It's just that the Democrats fucked up so bad on so many major things in a row while also having no talent to be able to sell it. So it's not just that and again, I just, you can't overstate this. This is the stuff we talk about all the time. But I really do think we've been on these issues that are the main ones, and been on the right side of them. But it's between let's say the first one is Russiagate, such a huge one. This huge claim about how the president is involved in a conspiracy with the Russians to overthrow the government, getting that wrong. Then, and the woke insanity, COVID just, destroyed them. It aged so poorly. It's really, really hard to kind of overstate how much the needle moved in a period. It was, again, COVID probably, even though, people obviously I've become known for talking about the war stuff, but COVID is really what launched us. What launched this show was, it was just we were like a little podcast who I think we're, doing a good job, but we were just so right and ahead of the curve on COVID. And when you started that way, it just it became this thing that just catapulted you because the whole country moved so far in our direction so quickly. And then we had this street cred from being hey, we were here.
Yeah, that is a big reason why part of the problem in Dave's podcast has taken off. They were very correct about that, as they were with Russiagate and the woke insanity, etc. But the point I really agree with Dave that he put at the beginning of that little segment there was the fact that there's no popularity on the left-wing side. If you consider the Democrats the left-wing side, the liberal side, you don't see popularity in any of their voices, any of their top brass to really deliver what they're looking for, what their base wants, and something that's actually able to be sold and marketed to the American populace. They threw up Tim Walz and Kamala Harris as their presidential candidates. And, I don't think that they have many people waiting in the wings behind them that have political acumen. They have Newsom, who has proven to be a disaster, but many of them still consider charming. AOC, who's a divisive and polarizing figure as well, but has some popularity in the Democratic Party. Hey, she, recently voted for $500 million for Israel, so maybe she's on that track to success in the Democratic Party. But they don't have many people to sell this of immense popularity, whereas Trump has an incredible cult of personality behind him. And despite all the scandals that have happened, and his popularity is suffering for that, we're seeing that out of major polls and indications from top influencers. Everything seems to confirm he is, not being helped by the way he's handled the Epstein story. He still has an immense cult following behind him. So that's where we're at, and I think Dave's right about that.
The whole time. But it was like, there was a point where something like 80% almost of adult Americans got the vaccines. There was a point where lockdowns were like supported, and there were, and then everybody turned on it and realized it was all bullshit. Thank God. But so anyway, so there was that, and then the Biden being senile thing, and then so now you have all of this, and who are your salesmen? Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and who do you got on the bench? Like you said, nobody. Even Bernie Sanders, you've been around this whole time, man. You're too attached to all of this. You never stood up against any of it while it was happening. But then on top of that, and this is why I really do. The more I think about this at this point, I go, and maybe this sounds convenient to say, but I really do think, I mean this, that it was the right thing to support Donald Trump, and it's the right thing to not support him now. Like, I just think that the Donald Trump winning was necessary to break up this system. And now he's such a failure who actually, isn't going to himself break up the system at all, that now he's got to be turned on too.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have supported Trump even knowing what we did know going into this second term, but I'm not going to be a hater on anyone selling that argument. I can understand the argument from a dissident perspective of why you would ultimately pull the lever for Trump over Harris, especially after all the nonsense Harris and AOC and Tim Walz and John Kerry and Hillary Clinton were saying about in the days leading up to the election, how much we need to police disinformation on the internet, stuff like that. Them talking about the fact that, we had to keep rearming Ukraine, and Trump's rhetoric was actually pretty good on that. Of course, he didn't deliver on his good rhetoric, how he would end that war. But listen, I get the reasons why you would have wanted to support Trump. I didn't do it. I wouldn't have done that. But no question that Dave is right now. He's not worthy of our support right now. No one that actually cares about ending the wars, ending the corrupt financial system, ending corporate welfare, the pernicious practices of central banking and the taxes they impose on all of us through inflation, the surveillance state, the cover-ups, the Epstein situation that we're not going to get answers on. The schism with Musk and not delivering on Doge, even close to the projections that they made. There's no reason to support this guy. And there's no fault in admitting that. If you supported Trump, I'm not going to jump down your throat if you say now, hey, I supported Trump and I was duped, because guess what? I supported the neocons back in 2003, 2004, and I was duped. And, I feel embarrassed about that to this day, but I think you grow in admitting your faults, and it was certainly a fault to favor the neocons back then. And, I'm proud of where I've come since then, but, we all go through changes. We all live life in a way where we hopefully learn from our mistakes in the past, and I think a lot of people can learn from their mistakes in supporting Trump.
I think that's kind of like the only hope we have, because really, I think the other thing is that, as we've been saying for months now, the Democrats, they lost their propaganda apparatus. And I think that's really a huge part of all of this too, is that it's not 2017. It's not 2017 where CNN and MSNBC can report all day long about Trump's tower meeting with the Russians. And oh my God, and we have, if you remember, Rob, do you remember back to the beginnings of Russiagate? Is that these were the things they had? Do you remember the things they had to sell Russiagate on? Like what they really harped on was the Podesta emails, right? Russia hacked the Podesta emails, And I guess the DNC emails too, or whatever, the Trump Tower meeting, and that off the cuff comment where Donald Trump said, Russia, if you have any more of the emails, I'm sure you'd be handsomely rewarded in the media to release all of them. Right. And that was, but then at the time, maybe it sounded kind of compelling. But once you looked into it, it was like, Russia didn't hack Podesta's emails. There's never been any evidence put forward of that at all. And even the thing they tried, like one thing they said, like, oh, they had Russian IP addresses, but then like everybody who knows anything, and I don't, but everyone who knows anything about like cyber attacks was like, IP addresses are like a 15-year-old can alter the IP address. That means absolutely nothing. No real like hacking of official government documents would be done by somebody who would leave their own IP address, essentially.
Yeah, the whole Russiagate thing is a farce, and what Dave said earlier is totally true, that the biggest sea change that we have seen is not a political sea change, it's a cultural sea change. It's that the Democrats and the liberal establishment has lost control over the information. There's been an information war raging for the last 10 years. A lot of people might not see that on the surface, but that's been the case. The mainstream media, the legacy media, the corporate media, whatever you want to call it, it's losing ground. And it's losing ground to popular podcasters, to X, to various social media platforms. And that's the way it's going to be. I don't see that changing unless the regime enacts complete totalitarianism lockdown over the information, like, say, places like North Korea would do, right? I don't see that changing whatsoever. We're in an age now where it's not just the Dan Rathers and Peter Jennings and Walter Cronkites that are, being trusted to deliver information to the American public, and the New York Times, by the way. It's, you and me. It's people out on YouTube. It's podcasters. It's people posting on X. It's people sharing information and breaking stories on those platforms. And again, this is not going to change. We're in a new age now, and they can't get away with all these absurd hoaxes anymore. In either direction, in either the left-wing direction or the right-wing direction.
And then the Tower meeting was just like, oh, some Russian lawyer said she had dirt on Hillary Clinton. And they were like, okay. And they took a meeting, and then she didn't. And they were like, okay. And that was it. And then the Trump thing where he said it on TV was just like a dumb joke that Donald Trump made that they tried to make. And somehow they tried to argue that like, no, this was evidence of a conspiracy. And you were like, and that's their secret channel? Is that Donald Trump just openly says at press conferences? Like, it was too ridiculous. Anyway, but back then they could get people watching, and they could kind of still control the narrative a little bit. And now they just can't. And so nobody, like, it's amazing. Nobody is buying, as much as they're all disgusted with Donald Trump, none of them are buying that the Democrats are the answer.
Yeah, I have to agree with him on that no one really believes that Democrats are the answer, but I do think ultimately people will choose between the Republicans and Democrats again in future elections and future presidential elections. I don't see any third party being the true beneficiary of this, and I think what it would take for that is if a very prominent person with a big following and passionate backing would run for the Green Party or Libertarian Party or Constitution Party or any host of third parties. That would be the only avenue, I think, that would make them federally relevant. That's not to say that they aren't relevant in their local communities. You can get elected to school boards and sheriffs, county commissioners as a third party. Many people are, and that can have some tangible results in affecting your community and maybe even pushing back against the immoral and unconstitutional mandates of the federal government. That's nullification. That's something I support vigorously. Historically, I've supported that very strongly. But ultimately, we are in a two-party system, and even if the Democrats aren't benefiting from the fallout of the Trump administration over Ukraine and Iran, or what's happening in Gaza, which is a genocide, by the way, or the Epstein cover-up, it doesn't ultimately matter unless we see a tangible sea change. Now, Dave is right that the real change is the loss of their control over the media. The regime doesn't have control to be able to spin and sell and market their hoaxes endlessly to an American public that doesn't have alternatives that they can seek to go to for true answers. And we are seeing that is the case. I think when posterity looks back upon this age, maybe in 100 years, maybe in 150 years, they're going to recognize that the biggest change over this period is not any kind of political revolution of any kind. I mean, we've seen incredible continuity in our political system in the last decades, especially, you know, in my entire lifetime for sure. What they will see and identify, I think correctly so, is a change in the way that information is being delivered, whether through social media or YouTube or podcasts, etc., which is not only displacing, but it's completely replacing what the legacy media gave us in the past. It's immediately recognizable and it's immediately accessible to, I would dare say, most people in the world now. Even in developing countries, many people have access to the internet now. But certainly Americans do as well. And it's causing a lot of political changes. And, you know, ultimately, I think that Breitbart was right when he said politics is downstream from culture. It takes cultural changes to manifest in political outcomes. And maybe we will see some political outcomes follow from this phenomenon, but this phenomenon is happening first. And yeah, I don't think the two-party system is necessarily doomed, but there are some interesting dynamics that we're looking at here in regard to these polls. But let me know down below, do you think Dave is right that the two-party system may be doomed here, that this is, you know, indicative of something that will result in a change in which this regime operates, the two-party system? Let me know in the comments down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to Dave. His podcast is amazing. He's one of the best analysts of this stuff. And please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. If you do that, you'll support me, which I really appreciate. And as thanks, I'm going to give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.